Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon. Happy to be here with you on July 12th. It is approximately 3:30 in the morning, and I could not go to sleep with the news that was troubling me all night long. And I wanted to share that with you. There's something that is happening in America, a trend that we are seeing, and it seems to be downplayed, perhaps even hidden on purpose from the American people. And we wanted to share the data that we were able to find and hear what you think about this trend that seems to be sweeping the entire nation. Now, before we get into that news, I do want to say first, if this is the first time you're seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. At the same time, we want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear your voices from anywhere in the world, because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe that the First Amendment is not just an American amendment, but it is something for everyone in the world to speak about the issues that matter to you. And therefore, we hope to see you this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, no matter what your government thinks, no matter how the internet overlords feel. So, to the issue at hand today, what is the big thing that's kept me up all night long, that won't let me go to sleep? It's the fact that there is a trend in America that we have seen since 2021, but most notably since 2022, and is continuing and gaining more speed, it seems, more attention, more of a tsunami in 2023. And you probably haven't noticed it, except we keep getting minor local news announcements about it on a regular basis. It's that Democrats are giving up on the Democratic Party. Matter of fact, and more importantly, we're not just talking about voters, we're talking about elected officials. The Democratic Party is breaking away from the Democratic Party. It's something that a lot of people may not have noticed as much, something that they haven't seen, but it is something that is happening. Now, one of the first indications of that comes from PBS. This was on June 27th in 2022, reporting on the number of Democratic rank-and-file voters who gave up on the Democratic Party. It was actually 1 million Democrats in 43 states that switched from the Democratic Party to the GOP to become Republicans. To quote from the article, it's more so a rejection of the left than embracing the right. Now that's very interesting, and they note that the transition away from the Democratic Party began 5 or 6 years ago for many of these individuals. The AP examined nearly 1.7 million voters who had actually made the switch. And this is over the last 12 months. This is a left-leaning news source reporting on an impact, something that is impacting the left-leaning party in America, the Democratic Party, and its splinter faction, the progressive movement. Now, we've been seeing this for quite some time, and many people will say, well, Mike, why are we talking about that today? This is in 2022. Why is that important to mention at this moment? Well, in particular, what started me on this process is when I heard the news and saw the article today, Democratic State Representative flips to GOP, blindly followed a decision. This is coming from Newsweek, which is rated as being a neutral source. And they were speaking specifically about Representative Maisha Maynor and why she left the Democratic Party on July 11th. Now, the news, it didn't get a lot of news, didn't get a lot of coverage, but I think it's important because we've been seeing a trend. She's not the first, nor is she the last, as a woman, as someone who is black, as a Democrat. And that's important Now, we want to go through this with you to show you the evidence of what we're talking about, because this isn't just an individual, as many of the news reports want us to believe, that it's just one person. It's an outlier. It's not a trend. At least, again, that's what the mainstream news media wants to portray this as. But it's not. We've already shown you that in PBS, rank and file voters, over 1 million of them, have made the switch already. And why is this happening? Let's address that first. Why are they making this switch? Well, because they have seen something happening consistently whenever the Democrats, since 2021, with Joe Biden taking over the White House, we've seen a certain consistency. Maybe you'll see this trend as we show you, first of all, a conversation with Representative Nancy Mace in Congress, speaking to a representative, one of the Texas state Democrats that ran away from Texas because they didn't want to take a vote they were going to lose. They abandoned their job, broke Texas law to be able to try and stop doing their job. And they did so because they were complaining about voting rights. They said black people aren't being treated fairly in the state of Texas. This is Representative Nancy Mace, and I want you to listen to this. It's very important, and we have the words on the screen as well. This is the questioning she had to say.
And what percentage of blacks in Texas, black and brown African Americans, are registered to vote?
Oh, a huge percentage.
70%. Do you know what percentage of African Americans, black and brown Texans, have voted on average or in the last election?
About 64%.
Correct. Do you know how many whites are registered to vote in Texas?
Far more than African Americans.
72%. You have 70%.
Okay, I want to stop it here. And as she's about to highlight, so the difference in Texas, black versus white, the difference is 2%. And the Texas state Democrat didn't know. She didn't know the numbers. But she's telling you, and she promoted the idea that it's a vast difference, that somehow blacks are being underrepresented. The difference, again, is 2%. Let's go on and see what else.
Of blacks in Texas who are registered to vote. You have 72% of whites in Texas who are registered to vote. Do you know the percentage of whites who turned out to vote in recent elections?
I want to say over 50-some percent.
65%. Yeah. Do you know what percentage of Hispanic?
So, again, let's stop for a moment. So the percentage of who actually did vote, 1% difference. According to, and this number, the state Democrat did know. It was 64% of blacks voted in the most recent election. And at that time in 2022, 65% of whites voted. The difference was 1%. But again, the Texas state Democrats, their argument was, well, blacks aren't being represented. They're being held back. They're not allowed to go out and vote. And yet, according to the data, they are voting. They're voting significantly. They're voting as much as whites are voting, or at least within a percentage. So when we see that data, the question comes up, are we being told the truth? Are Democrats really telling us what's going on? And I want to go into even more of the data. Why do we see this? Well, here's another thing. Do Democrats plan to cancel the presidential primary debates? This was a question on April 25th of 2023. This is a fact check from Newsweek, a neutral news source. And according to the fact check, as much as they want to say that, well, Republicans do this as well, the reality is that Democrats right now are the ones who are asking for this. In fact, commentator Mac Wallace had more than 962,000 followers on Twitter, almost 1 million Democrats that were upset that Democrats will not allow for a debate because many Democrats do not support Joe Biden, and we will confirm that for you in just a moment. And so they're very upset about this. And if we look through, you will see that the ruling from Newsweek is, well, this is misleading to say that the Democrats are canceling debates. Their answer is that the Democratic Party is doing exactly what it has always done, which is deny Democrats the ability to have a debate to choose the nominee for the next presidential election. That this is just commonplace and that it is normal for Democrats not to hear the voices of their rank and file members. That's kind of troubling. And that doesn't make anyone, any Democrat, confident. But it's not just that. What is it that the Democrats are representing right now? Well, when we take a look at it, a poll finds that the majority of Americans support anti-trans policies. Now, this is coming from The Advocate, a far-left site. And so the way they want to word it is, well, no, Americans are anti-trans. But they have to admit that the same majority of Americans oppose discrimination, which doesn't seem to make any sense. And when you look through this, as we have, a majority of the participants in the post-KFF poll opposed gender-affirming treatments for young people. See, notice there's a key word here, for young people. 68% of Americans opposed the use of puberty blockers for trans youth in the age range of 10 to 14. 58% opposed hormonal treatments for those who are aged 15 to 17. And majorities did approve of gender-affirming counseling or therapy for both age groups. So what we're seeing is the American people don't have a problem with someone saying they might have a different gender and to seek support for possibly having a different gender. But if that individual is under the age of consent, if they cannot consent, if they are too young to understand the consequences of what they're doing, then the majorities of Americans, an overwhelming majority of Americans, say, leave the children alone, let them be children. Give them time. Don't change them until they're able to consent as an adult. Well, the Democrats don't really like to say that. If you notice, again, what was it that the Advocate said? Well, Americans are anti-trans. No, that's not what they're saying. They're saying leave the children alone. They word this very carefully so that you don't notice they're targeting children, and they're admitting it. That's why the question is made, and they're giving the age groups. Democrats are targeting children 10 to 17 years of age. 10 to 17. They're targeting children who are 10 to 14 in terms of altering their bodies potentially forever. That's not the same thing as being anti-trans for an adult, a consenting adult, an adult who has the ability to understand the consequences of their choices. It's a very different scenario than what the left would like to present to you and try and present it as negatively as possible. And Democrats aren't very happy with that. I can understand why they wouldn't be. Thinking about affirmative action, something that just came up. And if we see the Pew Research Center most recently came out with an article on June 16th, about the same time as the Supreme Court came down with its decision. And we see that when Americans are looking at the affirmative action question in surveys from the spring of 2023, 50% of Americans disapprove of using race, of being racist in college admissions, that it is unconstitutional. 50% disapproved, only 33% approved. In fact, the only groups that were more in favor of the affirmative action and discrimination, government-approved bias, was Democrats in general and blacks more specifically. And every other group, Hispanic, Asian, white, Republicans, they all overwhelmingly believed that it was unconstitutional, that it was unfair. Even when you look at just Democrats, 29%, nearly a third of Democrats felt it was unconstitutional. Even blacks, 29%, felt it was unconstitutional as well. So we have a couple of issues here. Democrats are not happy that their voice is being nullified by the Democratic Party. Democrats are upset that the Democratic Party is attacking their children, that they are confronting their children and saying that you must blindly affirm, you must allow the Democratic Party to decide how you're going to raise your child and how your child's life is going to be affected forever. These are not new things. We talked about it before. And if you talk about affirmative action, if you point out the numbers, if you point out the question of constitutionality, well, as we showed you earlier last week, the answer that we received in a live stream was personal attacks, which we have put together for you and showed you the personal attacks we received for daring to even bring up the question. Never was the question answered, is it constitutional? The answer was, you must obey, otherwise you're a racist. Or in my case, anyone who happened to be black and saying it's constitutional, well, then you're a traitor to your race, as determined by Democrats and progressives, that they nullified my inherent race because they didn't like it politically. It's kind of telling, and a lot of Americans are noticing this, not just in live streams like the one that we do every Sunday, but they're hearing it in the news media, they're hearing it on social media, they're seeing it repetitively. Look at the TV shows, the movies, entertainers, and what they're saying. They're getting this told to them on a regular basis. Obey, do what we say, the government is always right, you have no choice. Now, even the most recent poll that we can find, which came out July 10th, which is a poll as reported by National Review, a YouGov survey, which was conducted it was sponsored by The Economist, which is a neutral organization, between July 1st and July 5th. Do you approve or disapprove of the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action, which ruled that colleges are not allowed to consider an applicant's race when making a decision about admissions? That affirmative action, that bias, prejudice, is not to be used. 59% approved and said the Supreme Court was correct, that it is unconstitutional based on the 14th Amendment. 27% disapproved. The poll also found that significant majorities of pluralities of Black and Hispanic Americans supported the decision to overturn affirmative action. 44% of Black Americans approved of the Supreme Court that confirmed that affirmative action is unconstitutional. 36% disapproved. 45% of Hispanics approved. They agreed that affirmative action is unconstitutional. 28% disapproved. Again, what happens when you say that publicly, though? As an individual, when the Democrats and the progressives are able to see your face, they use personal attacks. Even though they're trying to make it seem like you're an outlier, that you are by yourself, that you are the one who's different or weird or isolated, that you're not the norm. And yet, polling after polling shows the majorities of Americans all are on the same page. They all agree. It's much like when we look at what the approval rating of Joe Biden, as reported July 10th, that the most recent IBD TIP poll shows that 38% of Americans 18 and older do not approve of Joe Biden. They are upset with him. 51% absolutely disapprove of him. 18% agree with him. 18%, not even a quarter of the Americans agree with Joe Biden. And this is a trend that has been continuing from March and April, May and June. The numbers continue to go down and down and down in terms of the approval rating for Joe Biden. And we're seeing this on issue after issue after issue. And again, the Democratic Party has made it clear, not only in the Newsweek report that said, well, this is normal. Democrats never listen to their constituents, their voters, their party's base. But we see that Democrats, as reported by Politico, yet another left-leaning source, that state that Move On and Third Wave are reaching out to Senate Democrats on July 27th to silence their voices, to tell them that they do not have a choice in who will be the nominee for the Democratic Party. They do not have a choice. They do not have a voice in the next election, that they must accept what the party has said. And they're going to round them up on July 27th to tell them to shut up because they have no choices in the matter. And Democrats are seeing this over and over and over again. And as a result of seeing this, as a result of these voices telling them to shut up, that they have no opinion, or that their opinion is not valued and unimportant to the Democratic Party, we're not only seeing 1 million Democrats leave, but we're seeing the Democratic politicians leave. As an example, we point to 3 months ago, North Carolina State Representative Tricia Cotham left the Democratic Party and joined the GOP. That's something that occasionally, yes, that does happen, but the question is, why did it happen? What did she have to say? And I think that's perhaps one of the most important things. North Carolina Democrat, this is what she had to say. This is directly from PBS, again, left-leaning news site. And speaking about Tricia Cotham, we look at what she had to say about this. And her reason for leaving, I think, is incredibly important. And Democrats across this nation are hearing and seeing and saying the same thing. I will not be controlled by anyone. Look at what Democrats have said about the progressives and the elected Democrats. What have they said about the trans bill? What have they said about affirmative action? What have they said about the economy? Look at every aspect of what Democrats are pushing forward on the progressive agenda, and then look at what we are hearing. Cotham, a woman, a Democrat, says, I will not be controlled, that the Democrats were trying to control her. And of course, the answer from the Democrat Party is that, well, she's a spy. She's a traitor. She's a spy and a traitor because she no longer wanted to be controlled after 10 years as a Democrat, an elected Democrat. But she's been a spy, they say, and a traitor for 10 years, supporting the Democratic Party, its candidates, and its policies for 10 years. And when she became fed up and decided that she no longer wanted to be controlled, that she no longer wanted to follow the agenda, a progressive agenda, an agenda that targets children, an agenda that promotes prejudice and bias, when she said no, then she became the bad guy. They attacked her. That is a personal attack when you say someone is a spy, that they're a traitor. That seems pretty odd, but it's not unique because in West Virginia, lawmaker Elliot Pritt switched from the Democratic Party to the GOP. This was in April of 17th. This is the second time we saw this in another state. Now, while Mr. Pritt did not provide a statement of his own in changing his position, what we do see is that he wasn't alone. In December, State Senator Glenn Jeffries, who represented the 8th Senatorial District, he also switched from the Democratic Party to the GOP. We see that State Senator Jason Barrett, who represents the 16th state senatorial district, switched from the Democratic Party to the GOP. And of course, as many people remember, Governor Jim Justice, who served as a Democrat in the 2016 election, switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party in his first term, in less than a year into his first term. We're seeing a trend here. Now that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals so far that are all switching, many of them in 2023. And that brings me to the most recent announcement. The most recent individual, as we were mentioning previously, and I want to go back to that to show you again, from Newsweek. Who was this representative? Who said this? Representative Maisha Maynor. And I think it's very important to hear what she had to say about this. I will never apologize for being a black woman with a mind of my own. She dared to not have the same political agenda, the same progressive agenda of the Democratic Party. She dared to say she had different views, and because of that, she was attacked by the Democratic Party. She was attacked so viciously, she felt she had to switch parties. In fact, if we look at just the Daily Beast, on July 11th, yesterday, Democratic Georgia State Representative defects to the GOP after school voucher vote. Now, when we look at this entire article, what did she have to say for herself? I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left her when they embraced left-wing radicalism, lawlessness, and put in the interest of illegal aliens over the interests of Americans. This is what she had to say, that they crucified her, that they abandoned her, especially on the issues of school choice and their efforts to defund the police. She could not stand it anymore. She could not stand for that. It was a moral decision for her. This is in Georgia. A black woman in Georgia, a black Democrat in Georgia. And she is being attacked mercilessly by Democrats, by far left progressives, saying that she defected. They highlight that she is a turncoat. A turncoat, that she betrayed people for standing up for school vouchers, for standing up for American citizens over the criminals who have entered our nation illegally, that have billions being spent on them, diverting billions of dollars from young children, from veterans, from American citizens, and the operation of our country. But that makes her a turncoat. That makes her someone who is evil. She defected, according to what we see from the Democrats. This is very, very personal. And I think most Americans are seeing this over and over again. Look at the answers that we hear. If you disagree, even in entertainment, Indiana Jones is resoundingly found to be a bad movie. It is objectively a bad movie. And because it is promoting the progressive ideology, if you say that, you're the bad person. You don't understand. You just don't have the right understanding of politics and entertainment. It's your fault. You're the problem. We've heard that from as going back to She-Hulk and talking about Star Wars with Rey. We've heard that about The Witcher, Witcher Origins. We've heard that about Willow. We've seen that in movie after movie after movie. Ant-Man and the Wasp. You have to like communism, and if you don't, you're the problem. Over and over it goes. And yet, the public is rejecting it over and over again. It's very interesting, I think. And I found it interesting because when I looked at this and I see this trend where we have seen 5, 6 individuals in the Democratic Party in key states that Democrats absolutely need to win the 2024 election. When I see this and couple that with the trend that we are seeing amongst Democratic mainstream voters, I said to myself, why is no one mentioning that this has gone from an outlier to what appears to be a growing trend, all on the same basis? That Democrats have abandoned the American people. They have abandoned their own party members, that they are looking for obedience. Well, I looked up party switching. How often has this been discussed? Is anyone noticing this trend? And the answer is no. This is not being talked about in the news media. This is not being talked about on mainstream media or in search engines. It is rarely, if ever, mentioned, even though we are seeing Democrat after Democrat after Democrat. You're not seeing this in terms of the terms of party switching, or Democrat joins the GOP, or Democrat defects. They're keeping this as regional stories. No one will address this on a national level. You have to ask yourself, why? Why? Oh, I know. Even in Texas, we were told that Texas black people don't have the right to vote. And that's why you have to fall in line until you learn the numbers, as Nancy Mace presented it on the floor in a congressional hearing, and numbers don't match up. How about when we look at people like Stacey Abrams, who lost twice in her bid, saying that it's all about racism. In fact, even Forbes magazine, in their contributor article on November 21st of 2022, said the reason why Stacey Abrams lost is because she's a fat black woman with curly black hair. Well, that doesn't seem to be correct, because it wasn't racism. That's what you heard from Stacey Abrams. It's racism. Except the University of Georgia, in a poll, finds that 99% of Georgia voters reported no issue with casting a ballot. Remember, Democrats told you that SB 202 was a bill that would restrict black people from ever being able to vote, that they would never be able to cast their votes. And yet, when the University of Georgia looked through the numbers, they found 98.9% of voters found no issues casting the ballot. In fact, if you go to the report itself, as we are presenting here, and we will have the link in the description so you can see it for yourself, under the question, self-reported problems with voting, individual voters actually stepping up and saying they had an issue. Black voters, 0.5% of black voters said there was an issue. There were more people who were white or every other ethnicity that said that they had a problem. 99.5% of black voters had no problem. There was no racism. There was no Jim Crow. There was nothing stopping them from being able to vote, and to vote with ease. It makes us wonder that we are seeing black people are voting. Many of them are voting as Democrats, as reported by NBC News. But there is a growing trend among all voters that are Democrats to leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party isn't listening to the public. They're demanding that the public obey them, that they have made decisions and you have no choice. The members of their own party, even in the United States Senate, have no choice. They must obey. The Democrats have gone too far. They have overstepped their bounds, we believe. And there is a backlash. Whether Americans are voting Libertarian or third party or Republican or conservative, there is a backlash. Americans are realizing that they have another choice, and that there are other voices, and that they need to hear them. That they can no longer stand idly by, even within the party, even elected officials who have been there a decade or more cannot stand aside and allow this abuse of power. They have to speak up and they have to make a difference. I think that is telling that you can search on Google, and we did. You can search with Twitter. You can search through the trends, and you can try and find the stories. You can try and find the articles. You can see if anyone in the mainstream news media has noticed that there is a trend, a growing trend of a huge magnitude of not only rank and file Democrats, but of elected officials that are all leaving for the same reason, because they are being attacked personally and professionally, because they are being told that they have no voice and no options, even when they are trying to act in the best interest of their own constituents, even when they're trying to do what the Democratic Party says are their own principles. No, you're supposed to just obey blindly, even when America says they don't agree, even when America says it's unconstitutional, even when America says there's a better path forward. Yes, I'm a conservative Republican. That's not why I'm having this conversation with you. It's not why I'm highlighting this trend that we are seeing. I think it's an important First Amendment issue to realize your voice is being suppressed. You are being oppressed. You're being treated like a slave, that you have no option. The Democrats are actively punishing people, their own people, for daring to stand up and say, there's a better path forward. That for the sake of America, regardless if you're a Democrat, a Libertarian, or a Republican, we have to realize we cannot allow any political party to exist in the manner where they are denying their rank and file members, that they are denying American citizens, elected or unelected, the ability to have a First Amendment right of free speech and to make choices for themselves, especially if they are an elected official, especially when they have sworn an oath and are obligated to act in the best interest of their constituents, to serve their constituents, not their party. There is no oath to be a Democrat. There is an oath to be an elected official. That difference is more than just semantic. It is very important to our entire bedrock of democracy. At least that's how we feel about this. Perhaps you feel differently. Have you noticed this trend? Did you see it only as a singular story in your local newspaper? Or has someone actually noticed that this is happening across this entire nation? That is happening in state after state? That even black women and white women and regular male and male Democrats, that Democrats of every shape, age, flavor are all having the same statement. They're all leaving for the same reason. And I have to ask you, why wouldn't the national news media notice this trend? Notice the cause of this trend, the similarity of the reasons that are being given and the punishment that is being doled out by the Democratic Party, by the elites. Why aren't they telling you about this? How is that not news? But I look forward to hearing what you have to say. We've provided the evidence. The links are in the description. Now it's time for you to tell us, what do you think about this? We thank you for taking your time today, and we hope to see you this Sunday and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, admitted he has not read the Arizona immigration law. Let's think about that for a moment. I know it is a difficult task to stand up in front of our peers and say to Congress and say that Congress has failed to listen to voters.
You here at CPAC said yes to President Donald Trump in 2016, and I know you're going to say yes to Paul.
She was very aware that she had the flag in her hands and that the flag was dragging on the ground. That is a intentional action. She knows what she is doing. She then drops the flag. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about.
I held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets, need to be licensed and do not need to be on the street.
That's right. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a representative in Congress who is writing laws to deny American citizens their rights, has no idea what she's talking about.
And they are against the vaccine mandate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you support that?
We shouldn't have any problem in meeting that error rate, because last time I checked, there were not a lot of planes crashing into each other at airports, right? You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.
No one wants to point out the quote from Joe Biden where he is admitting that he is willing to lie to the American people.